Hello and welcome to the fourth video in a sequence of 6 videos on calculating a percentage of an amount. In the first video we established what a percentage is. In the second video we looked at how to calculate 50%, understanding that 50% is equivalent to a half. In the previous video, so in the third video, we learned how to calculate 10% of a number, understanding that 10% as a fraction equivalent is a tenth. And in this video we're going to learn how to calculate 5% of a number. Now there is no exact method in calculating 5% of a number. There are a few different ways that you can go about calculating it. I think this is the perfect time to introduce a little bit of ratio into calculating percentage of amounts. So we always start with 100%. Whatever value we have is classed as 100%. To get to 50% of a number, 100 to 50, we divide it by 2, because 100 divided by 2 is 50. So to calculate 50% of a number, you divide it by 2. 10% of a number, you went from 100 to 7% by dividing by 10, because 100 divided by 10 is 10%. 5%, you have two ways. And we're going to do a different colour pen just to show that. You can either go from 10 to 5, and 10% to 5, or 10 to 5 is by dividing by 2. Or you can go from 50 to 5 by dividing by 10. Those are your two options. So whatever amount you have at the beginning, you calculate 50% and 10% first, and then you can either divide your 10% by 2 or divide your 50% by 10. So let's look at this example here, 5% of 300. Now this is slightly more challenging than finding 50% and 10% because you need to do that first. So what I'm going to do is give 3 examples and demonstrate how to use both methods in able to calculate 5% of 300. The first of those methods, like we've discussed, is finding 50% and then dividing it by 10, or we can find 10% and divide that by 2. So let's start with this example here, 50% and then divide by 10. So 50% of 300. Well, 50%, like we saw in a previous video, we quite simply divide by 2. So we are doing 300 divided by 2. 300 divided by 2. I am not going to use bus stop here because I can do it mentally. However, if you struggle, you could use bus stop. 300 divided by 2 is 150. Now that I've got 150, I'm going to divide it by 10. 150 divided by 10. Again, you are not going to use bus stop because it is dividing by 10. If you need to, you can write out your place value columns. I know what 150 divided by 10 is, so 150 divided by 10 is 15. So 5% of 300 is 15. That was our first way of doing it. The second way is to find 10% first, then divide by 2. So 10% of 300. How do we find 10% of a number? Well, 10% of a number we divide by 10. 300 divided by 10 is 30. So 10% of 300, 300 divided by 10 equals 30. Then the next step, we find that 10%, we divide it by 2. So we're doing 30 divided by 2. 30 divided by 2 is 15. Same answer, of course you can get the same answer because you're finding 5%. 5% of 300 is 15. So here is our second example, 5% of 450. Now method 1, like we said before, we could find 50% and divide that by 10, because 50 divided by 10 is 5. Or we could calculate 10% and then divide by 2, because 10 divided by 2 is also 5. So starting with the 50% version, we're going to start by finding 50% of 450. How do we find 50% of a number? We divide by 2. In this example, it's slightly tricky. I am going to use bus stop. 450. 2's into 4 go twice. 2's into 5 go twice, remainder 1. And 2's into 10 go 5. 225. Next step, divided by 10. 225 divided by 10. Now, although I can do this in my head, I am going to use my place value columns just to demonstrate. So we've got our hundreds, our tens, our ones, our tenths. Let's add our hundredths there. Let's draw our lines. Okay, so 225 divide, which tells us we're getting smaller, which means we're moving in this direction. 1 decimal place. Let's write in our number. 225 is in there, and let's move each number 1 decimal place. One place value column. So 5 ones become 5 tenths, 2 tens becomes 2 ones, and 2 hundreds becomes 2 tenths. Let's make sure we put on in our decimal. 225 divided by 10 is 22.5, which tells us 5% of 450 is 22.5. Let's do it the other method just to check. So we find 10% first. 10% of 450. That's the same as saying 450 divided by 10. Now I can do that in my head in terms of that calculation. However, just to demonstrate, I'm going to use the place value columns again. So we've got our ones, our tens, our hundreds. Let's put our tenths. That'll be enough. Write in our number, 450. We're getting smaller, so we're moving in that direction towards our tenth rather than towards our 100. 1 decimal place because there's 1 0 in 10, and then we shift those numbers. So 0 moves 1 place, 5 moves 1 place, and 4 moves 1 place. Keep that decimal in there. There is no value in our tenths column nor in any of the columns after, so 450 divided by 10 is 45. So we've got 10%. Now we need to find whatever our 10% is, we divide by 2. So we are doing 45 divided by 2. Quite a tricky calculation to do in our head, so we're going to use bus stop. 45 divided by 2. 2's into 4 go twice. 2's into 5 go twice. Remainder 1. 2's into 10 go 5. Make sure we keep our decimal in there. So 45 divided by 2 is 22.5. This tells us that 5% of 450 is 22.5. Okay team, this is our final example, 5% of 12. See if you can have a go first at home. Use either way, either find 50% first and then divide that by 10, or find 10% and then divide it by 2. Off you go. So let's see what you got. 5% of 12. Let's find 50% of 12 first. 50% of 12. 12 divided by 2 equals 6. And then we're doing 6 divided by 10, the last part. 6 divided by 10. Let's write out our place value columns. Ones, tens, decimal, tenth. There's 6 ones. Dividing by 10, so going that way, 1 decimal place. Make sure we put in a decimal point in our placeholder. 6 divided by 10 is 0.6. So 50% of 12 is 0.6. But let's do it the other way just to check. 10% divided by 2. So 10% of 12. Slightly trickier than before. So let's write out our place value columns. enough for now, so there's our 12. We're going in that direction. 1 0 moving 1 decimal place. Ten percent of 12 is 1.2. And finally 1.2 divided by 2. Can't do that mentally. I could do, but I'm going to use bus stop just for this example. 2's into 1 doesn't go. Okay, that decimal lined up. 2's into 12 goes 6. 0.6. 5% of 12 is 0.6. So hopefully in this video you've learned how to calculate 5% of a number. Remember, we start with 100%. To find 50%, we divide it by 2. To find 10%, we divide it by 10. And to find 5%, you could either, once you've got 10%, divide it by 2, or once you've found 50%, divide it by 10. I hope you've enjoyed this video. There are 2 more videos to come. The next video will look at how to calculate 1% of a number. And once you have all of those, once you've got 100, 50, 10, 5 and 1, you can calculate any percentage that is out there. So tune in next time. Hope you enjoy and see you all soon.